The slave markets of Voraxia Prime operated under three simple rules: no questions, no refunds, and no mercy. Fleet Admiral Kithara Vexthal watched from her command throne as another shipment of bipedal specimens was herded into the holding pens below. The latest haul included several dozen creatures from a recently conquered world, pale, soft-skinned beings that the scouts had designated as Terrans. Pathetic, she muttered, her forearms adjusting the tactical displays surrounding her throne. The hegemony had crushed their homeworld in less than a solar cycle. No orbital defenses, primitive fusion drives, laughably simple AI systems. Yet something about these creatures unsettled her. During the conquest, they had fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness even when victory was impossible. Captain Morza Cantor approached the throne, his scaled hide bearing fresh scars from the Terran campaign. Admiral, the auction proceeds ahead of schedule. The Altarian Mining Consortium has placed substantial bids on the stronger specimens, and the others, combat arenas, mostly, some for biological experimentation. Gunner's mandibles clicked nervously. Admiral, there's something else. Our deep-range sensors detected an anomaly. 3 systems out. A ship but not matching any known configuration in our databases. Vexthal's primary eyes narrowed, while her secondary pair continued monitoring the slave operations. Survivors from the Terran fleet. Impossible. We accounted for every vessel. Their entire space force was scrap metal within hours. Cantor pulled up holographic displays. This signature is different, larger. The energy readings are unlike anything we've encountered. Below in the pens, a Terran female was beating her fist against the force barriers, screaming in her primitive language. Vexthal had learned enough to understand the words. They're coming for us. You don't know what you've done. The Admiral dismissed the outburst with a gesture. Conquered species always made such claims, promises of rescue, threats of retribution. None ever materialized. Double the perimeter patrols, she ordered. If scavengers think to interrupt our operations, they'll learn the price of crossing the hegemony. The Voraxia Prime facility was the crown jewel of the slave trade, built into a massive asteroid in the neutral zone where various galactic powers turned blind eyes. To profitable enterprises, 6 dreadnoughts and 40 escort vessels formed its defensive fleet. The asteroid itself bristled with plasma batteries, fusion torpedoes, and quantum disruptors capable of reducing capital ships to atoms. Ginner's community chimed. Admiral, Patrol Squadron 7 reports the anomaly has entered the system. Single vessel, unknown configuration. It's requesting permission to dock. Requesting. Vexthal's forearms froze over her controls. In 20 cycles of operation, no one had ever simply requested to dock. Pirates attacked, buyers transmitted credentials. Authorities came with warrants, but no one politely asked for entry. What exactly did they transmit? A single line, Admiral. In Galactic Standard, we've come for our people. The command center fell silent except for the hum of the station's massive reactors. Through the reinforced viewports, the stars seemed suddenly less friendly, more watchful. Bring the fleet to battle readiness, Vexthal commanded, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Lock down all civilian sections and prepare the asteroid's main batteries. Whatever these fools are planning, they'll learn that the hegemony fears no one. But as she spoke, a cold certainty settled in her gut, the same instinctive dread that had saved her life in 100 battles. Something was wrong. These Terrans had fought like madmen even when defeat was certain, and now a single ship was calmly approaching the most heavily defended slave market in the galaxy. The anomaly on their sensors wasn't just a ship. It was a promise kept. The ship that emerged from the void defied every law of military engineering. Where hegemony vessels were angular and bristling with obvious weaponry, this craft flowed like liquid metal, its hull seeming to shift and ripple in the starlight. No external weapons were visible, no communication arrays, no sensor clusters, just seamless, predatory curves that reminded Vexthal of deep ocean hunters from her homeworld. Size comparison, she demanded, approximately 2 kilometers long. Admiral, mass readings are inconsistent. Our sensors keep giving different results. 2 kilometers, larger than a dreadnought, but not quite a battleship. Vexthal allowed herself a moment of relief until her tactical officer's mandibles began chattering in alarm. Admiral, the ship has stopped precisely outside our maximum weapon range. They knew exactly where to position themselves. The implications hit like a plasma bolt to the chest. Their weapons ranges were classified military secrets. No species outside the hegemony should possess such information. Open the channel, Vexthal commanded. Let's see what these mystery buyers want. The main screen flickered, then filled with an image that sent ripples of unease through the command center. The being facing them was clearly Terran bipedal, pale-skinned, with those disturbing forward-facing predator eyes. But this one was different from the broken specimens in their holding pens. This one radiated controlled fury that seemed to make the air itself dangerous. I am Commander Hadrian Voss of the Terran Confederacy Navy, the figure stated, his voice carrying harmonics that made the translator struggle. You are holding 317 citizens of Earth. You will release them immediately. Gintor stepped forward, his scarred hide bristling with indignation. Terran, you are addressing Fleet Admiral Vexthal of the Hegemony. Your homeworld is ash. Your fleet is scrap. You have nothing to negotiate with. Voss's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes of coldness that made Vexthal's primary heart skip beats. I'm not here to negotiate. Then you're here to die, Gintor snarled. Admiral, let me take a squadron. You misunderstand, Voss interrupted. And now his voice carried undertones that the translator couldn't process. Frequencies that seemed to resonate in the very bones of everyone listening. I'm here to demonstrate why humanity doesn't leave its own behind. The channel closed. Immediately, every sensor on the station screamed alerts. The Terran ship hadn't moved, but space around it had begun to change. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist in ways that made the hegemony's most advanced scientists recoil from their instruments. Energy readings are off the scale, the sensor officer reported, his voice cracking. Admiral, whatever that ship is powered by, it's not fusion, not a time matter, not even 0 point. The ship vanished. Not moved, vanished. One moment it was there, the next, the space it had occupied was simply empty. No flash, no distortion. Nothing to indicate where the kilometers of alien warship had gone. Find it, Vexthal roared. Full sensor sweep, every patrol ship, her words died. As proximity alarms shrieked throughout the command center, the Terran ship materialized directly beside the asteroid, close enough that its hull scraped against the station's outer armor. With a sound like screaming metal, impossible, Gintor whispered. The asteroid shields, the defensive grid, nothing can get that close without. The first explosion cut off his words. Not an energy weapon, not a missile impact, something far worse. Sections of the asteroid's hull simply ceased to exist, leaving perfectly spherical voids that vented atmosphere and personnel into space. But these weren't random strikes. Each void appeared precisely where a weapon's battery had been mounted. In 30 seconds, the hegemony's most fortified position lost half its firepower to an enemy. That seemed to delete matter from existence. Vexthal watched her defensive grid collapse with a growing sense of horror. The tactical displays showed patrol ships converging on the Terran vessel, but as they closed the weapon's range, they simply stopped. Dead in space, power cores dark, crews presumably dead. What in the seven hells is that thing? She breathed. On the screen, the Terran ship pulsed once, a brief flare of impossible energies that made reality hiccup around it. When the distortion cleared, another dozen weapon emplacements had vanished, leaving the asteroid's surface pocked with perfect spheres of nothingness. A new transmission came through, Voss's voice now carrying harmonics that made the station's hull resonate ominously. You took our people from their homes. You broke our children, sold our mothers, fed our fathers to your arena beasts. Did you think we would simply accept this? Vexthal found her voice. What do you want? Justice, came the reply, and in that single word was a promise that made the admirals for hearts freeze in terror. The Terran ship began to move, flowing through space like a living thing, and everywhere it passed, hegemony vessels died without firing a shot. The massacre began in earnest as Dawn's Retribution, the name that appeared on every scanner, targeting the human vessel, carved through the hegemony fleet like a blade through flesh. Admiral Vexthal watched in growing horror as her patrol squadrons simply ceased to function. Their crews found dead at their posts with no wounds, no signs of struggle, just gone. Quantum torpedoes, full spread, she commanded, her four arms dancing across the tactical controls. Target everything within a 10-kilometer radius of that ship. The asteroid's remaining weapons batteries fired in unison, filling space with enough destructive force to crack a moon. The torpedoes reached their target zone and detonated in brilliant spheres of annihilation, energies that should have turned any matter within range into component atoms. When the light faded, Dawn's Retribution remained untouched, not even a scorch mark on its flowing hull. Admiral, her communications officer's voice cracked with fear. The slaves in Section 7 they're singing, through the internal monitors. Vexthal could see the human prisoners standing at their cell. Barriers, voices raised in a harmony that seemed to resonate through the station's very structure. The melody was unlike anything in the galactic database's ancient, powerful, filled with a hope that seemed to strengthen with each passing moment. Cut the feeds, she snapped. But the damage was done. Other species in the holding pens had begun to stir, sensing something changing. Some shift in the cosmic balance that even the most downtrodden could feel. Captain Guntor stumbled to her throne, his scaled hide pale with shock. Admiral, I've received reports from our surviving squadrons. The human ship. It's not just attacking randomly, it's targeting specific vessels. What do you mean? Only ships whose crews participated in the conquest of the Terran homeworld. Every vessel that took part in the slave raids. It knows, Admiral, somehow, it knows exactly which ships to target. The implications sent us through Vexthal's circulatory system. Perfect intelligence, impossible weapons. Technology that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions. What exactly had the hegemony awakened? Her contemplation was interrupted by another proximity alarm. 3 dreadnoughts, her heaviest. Units had managed to achieve firing positions around the human vessel. Their commanders, veterans of 100 conquests, coordinated their attack with precision born from decades of experience. Plasma beams that could pierce battleship armor struck Dawn's retribution simultaneously from 3 angles. The convergence point should have been a miniature star, temperatures that would vaporize any known material. The beams passed through the human ship as if it weren't there. Impossible, Guntor whispered. Matter can't simply choose whether to interact with energy. The fundamental forces don't work that way. But as they watched, the human vessel began to change. Its hull rippled and flowed, sections extending. Like reaching tendrils toward each of the attacking dreadnoughts, the tendrils moved slowly, almost gently, barely faster than a walking pace. The dreadnought captains, seasoned warriors all, poured everything they had into those approaching appendages. Fusion torpedoes, particle beams, graviton missiles, exotic matter warheads, weapons that had shattered worlds and ended civilizations. Nothing touched the reaching arms of Dawn's retribution. When the tendrils made contact with the hegemony ships, the results were immediate and horrifying. The massive vessel simply began to come apart, not exploding or burning, but dissolving at the molecular level. 3-kilometer-long dreadnoughts reduced to their component atoms in minutes, their crews. Death screams echoing across every communication channel. Admiral, the sensor officer reported, his voice hollow with shock. We're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human ship. Whatever it's preparing to do next. He never finished the sentence. Dawn's retribution pulsed once, and every remaining patrol vessel in the system went dark simultaneously. Not destroyed, simply turned off, as if someone had flipped a switch and decided they were no longer permitted to function. Vexthal stood from her throne, her forearms trembling, with rage and terror. Around her, the command center buzzed with desperate activity as her remaining officers tried to coordinate some kind of defense against an enemy that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of reality. Open a channel to Hegemony High Command. She ordered, emergency priority. Tell them we need the entire 7th Fleet. Possibly the 9th as well. Tell them. She paused, watching as another section of her asteroid fortress simply vanished, deleted from existence with surgical precision. Tell them we may have encountered something that changes everything. But even as she spoke, Vexthal knew with cold certainty that no fleet would arrive in time. Whatever the humans had become, whatever terrible evolution had occurred since their homeworld's fall, it was here now, and it was just getting started. Commander Hadrian Voss stood in the center of Dawn's Retribution's command nexus, his consciousness merged with the ship's quantum intelligence in ways that would have been impossible before humanity's great awakening. Through 1,000 sensors, he felt every breath of his captured people, tasted their fear and growing hope, heard their voices raised in the old songs of Earth. Primary objectives located. The ship's AI whispered directly into his mind, its voice carrying harmonics of crystalline vengeance. 317 human biosignatures confirmed. Additional data, 17,000. 412 sentient beings of various species held in similar conditions. Voss's jaw tightened. The intelligence had been accurate. This wasn't just a slave market. It was an industrial complex dedicated to the suffering of innocence. a cancer that had been allowed to metastasize in the dark corners of the galaxy. Execute Phase 2, he commanded, and felt the ship's agreement resonate through their neural link. Aboard the asteroid fortress, Admiral Vexthal watched her tactical display with growing disbelief. The human ship had stopped its seemingly random attacks and was now moving with purpose toward the station's commercial sectors. Not the military zones, not the command centers, the markets themselves. What is it doing? Intor asked, his scaled high glistening with stress-induced secretions. The answer came in the form of another impossible display of technology. Dawn's retribution extended dozens of the same flowing tendrils that had dissolved the dreadnoughts, but these moved with different intent. Instead of destruction, they began to slice through the asteroid's hull with surgical precision, carving perfect passages that bypassed every defensive system. "It's entering the station," Vexthal breathed, "boarding us through solid rock." Emergency klaxons wailed as the station's internal sensors detected the intrusions. But where security teams rushed to repel boarders, they found empty corridors filled with a strange, singing atmosphere that made their weapons feel heavy in their hands and their resolve crumble. Like ancient parchment. The first actual contact came in Section 7, where the human prisoners were held. Security Chief Draxon Kefmar led a full battalion of his best troops, determined to use the captives as leverage against whatever was coming through those impossible tunnels. They never got the chance. The corridor walls simply opened. Not doors, not blast points. The metal and composite materials flowed aside like water, revealing a passage lined with the same flowing material as the human ship's hull. From this opening stepped figures that made Draxon's troops stumble backward in confusion and terror. They looked human, the same basic bipedal configuration, the same pale skin and forward-facing eyes, but these beings moved with a fluid grace that seemed to bend space around them, and their eyes held depths that suggested vast intelligence and barely contained fury. "Stand down," one of them said, and the words carried such absolute authority that half of Draxon's battalion dropped their weapons before conscious thought could intervene. "You are trespassing on hegemony property," Draxon managed, his voice cracking. "These slaves are legally." The humans stepped forward, and reality seemed to ripple around them. "There are no slaves here. There are only people who are going home." What followed could not be called a battle in any traditional sense. The hegemony troops opened fire with weapons that had conquered 100 worlds, but their shots passed through the humans as if they were firing at ghosts. In return, the humans moved among them like avenging spirits, their touch somehow turning the most hardened warriors into weeping children, who dropped their weapons and fled within minutes. Section 7 was secure, its force barriers dissolved and its human prisoners free. But instead of chaos, there was only a deep, abiding calm as the rescued humans embraced their liberators with tears of joy and recognition. "My name is Kira Thorn," one of the liberators said to the freed prisoners, her voice carrying the same impossible harmonics as Commander Voss. "We are the reborn, children of Earth who have transcended the boundaries that once limited our species. You are safe now." Across the station, similar scenes played out in perfect coordination. The reborn moved through the asteroid fortress like a tide of justice, freeing prisoners, shutting down torture chambers, and leaving behind them a wake of hegemony troops too terrified or awestruck to offer resistance. But it was in the main auction hall that the true horror of the operation revealed itself. Admiral Vexthal, watching through security feeds, saw hundreds of her personnel simply stop, not killed, not wounded, but standing motionless as if waiting for something. "What have they done to them?" she whispered. Her answer came from Commander Voss himself, his image appearing on every screen in the command center. Behind him, the freed slaves of dozens of species stood in organized groups, their faces filled with hope for the first time in years. "They are experiencing what we call the recognition," Voss explained, his voice now carrying harmonics that made the station's hull resonate like a bell. "Your people are seeing, for the first time in their lives, the true cost of their choices. Every life they've destroyed, every family they've shattered, every innocent soul they've fed to your machines of profit." Vexthal felt a cold certainty settling in her bones, and then Voss's expression was peaceful, almost serene. "Then they choose redemption or consequence. The universe always balances its books, Admiral. Always. The arrival of the hegemonies." Seventh Fleet created a momentary spike of hope in Admiral Vexthal's for hearts. 50 ships of the line, including the massive battle carrier Void's Dominion under Fleet Admiral Graxos Turvoth, materialized at the system's edge in perfect battle formation. Admiral Turvoth, Vexthal transmitted, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The situation is beyond critical. We're dealing with technology that violates fundamental. Enough, came the harsh reply. Turvoth's image filled her. Screen 8 feet of scarred chitin and barely contained fury. I've read your reports. One ship, regardless of its capabilities, cannot stand against the 7th Fleet. Begin immediate evacuation of critical personnel while we deal with this anomaly. Through her sensors, Vexthal watched the fleet advance in textbook formation. Battleships in the center, carriers deploying fighter squadrons, destroyers screening the flanks. It was beautiful, precise, and utterly doomed. Commander Voss's voice echoed through every communication channel in the system. Fleet Admiral Turvoth, you have 30 seconds to reverse course and depart this system. This is your only warning. Turvoth's mandibles clicked in amusement. Human, I am Fleet Admiral of the 7th Fleet. I have reduced civilizations to ash and turned entire star systems into graveyards. Withdraw your single vessel, and I may allow you a quick death. The response came not in words, but in action. Dawn's retribution, still somehow connected to the asteroid fortress through its flowing tendrils, began to change. Its hull rippled and expanded, sections flowing outward, like liquid metal given terrible purpose. Within moments, the 2-kilometer vessel had become something larger, more complex, a structure that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space could contain. Energy readings are, the sensor officer's voice broke as his instruments overloaded. Admiral, I can't get coherent readings. It's like they're rewriting physics in real time. The first exchange came when Turvoth's lead battleships opened fire at maximum range. Plasma streams that could crack continents lanced across space toward the transformed human vessel. The beams struck barriers that hadn't been there moments before, shields that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight, surfaces that bent and reflected the incoming energy in impossible directions. But this time, the human ship fired back. What emerged from Dawn's retribution wasn't energy or matter in any conventional sense. Ribbons of twisted space-time lashed out from the vessel, moving at speeds that made light seem sluggish where they touched the hegemony ships. Reality simply rewrote itself. The battleship Iron Conquest, pride of the 7th Fleet, encountered one of these ribbons and began to change. Its hull flowed like mercury. Its weapons became gardens of crystalline growths. Its crew found themselves breathing liquid light that somehow sustained them, while filling their minds with visions of homeworlds they'd never seen. What in the void's name? Turvoth's transmission cut off, as his own flagship shuddered under the impact of something that turned half his forward batteries into singing flowers of pure energy. But the hegemony fleet was vast and experienced. Centuries of conquest had taught them to adapt to unusual weapons and alien technologies. The carriers launched their fighter squadrons, thousands of nimble craft that swarmed toward the human vessel like metallic locusts. These smaller ships proved harder for Dawn's retribution to target with its reality-warping weapons. Fighters slipped through gaps in the twisted space-time, their pilots screaming war cries as they closed for attack runs. The human ship's response was swift and merciless. Sections of its transformed hull opened like flowers, revealing chambers filled with swirling galaxies of light. From these spaces emerged fighters of their own craft that looked grown rather than built, their hulls seeming to shift between solid matter and pure thought. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Hegemony fighters dove and weaved through clouds of singing energy, their weapons carving bright lines across space. But the human craft moved like living things, flowing around incoming fire, their own weapons firing beams that seemed to convince enemy pilots that fighting was wrong, that peace was the only path forward. Hundreds of hegemony fighters simply stopped fighting, their pilots overcome by sudden understanding of the pain they caused. Others were caught by the reality-warping fields and transformed into butterflies of crystallized starlight, their pilots somehow still alive, but existing as beings of pure consciousness. In the main battle, the capital ships continued their deadly dance. The battleship Eternal Dominance managed to achieve point-blank range with Dawn's retribution, its captain using the chaos of the fire battle as cover. At a distance measured in meters rather than kilometers, it unleashed everything: fusion torpedoes, quantum disruptors, the dreaded Helios cannons that could ignite entire atmospheres. The human vessel absorbed it all, its hull seeming to drink in the destructive energies and transform them into something beautiful and terrible. When it responded, The eternal dominance didn't just die, it became a garden ship. Its corridors filled with singing trees. Its weapon bays transformed into chambers where former crew members tended flowers that bloomed in the vacuum of Space Fleet. Admiral Tervath, watching his fleet die in ways that defied every law of warfare he'd ever learned, made the decision that would define the battle's final phase. All ships, activate the rendering protocol. He transmitted, his voice hollow with desperate fury. Sterilize everything within 10 light minutes. Authorization Omega 77. The rendering protocol was the hegemony's ultimate weapon, a quantum cascade that would tear apart the fundamental bonds holding matter together. It would destroy everything in the target's only human ship, the asteroid fortress. The Seventh Fleet itself, reducing it all to component atoms. It was a weapon of spite, designed for moments when victory was impossible, but denial of victory to the enemy was still achievable. As the doomsday weapons charged, Commander Voss spoke once more, his voice carrying across every channel with infinite sadness. You would rather see everything burn than admit you were wrong. This is why humanity can never again trust the galaxy to police itself. The quantum cascade generators of the hegemony's Seventh Fleet reached critical charge, their combined output sufficient to unravel matter itself across an entire star system. Fleet Admiral Tervath stood on his bridge, his 8 feet of scarred chitin trembling with rage and desperate determination. As he prepared to initiate the rendering protocol, "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "our own ships are still in the cascade zone. The protocol will destroy us as well. Better to die with honor than live with the knowledge that we were defeated by a single vessel." Tervath snarled, "All remaining ships, prepare for..." His words were cut off as every screen in the fleet simultaneously displayed the same image. Commander Hadrian Voss, but changed now, his form seeming to exist partially outside normal space-time. Behind him stood thousands of figures, humans who had been transformed by something beyond conventional understanding, their eyes holding depths that suggested access to knowledge meant for gods. Admiral Tervath, Voss spoke, his voice carrying harmonics that made reality itself seem to listen. "You are about to commit an act that will murder every living being in this system, including the 17,000 innocents you've kept as slaves. Is your pride worth so many lives?" "They are acceptable losses," Tervath replied, but his mandibles trembled as he spoke. "The hegemony will not be humiliated by primitives." Voss's expression was infinitely sad. "Then you've chosen consequence over redemption. So be it." What happened next would be analyzed by xenobiologists and theoretical physicists for centuries to come, though few would ever truly understand what they witnessed. Dawn's retribution began to sing not through any conventional audio system, but through vibrations in the fabric of space-time itself. The song was beautiful and terrible, a harmony that seemed to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of creation. As it spread through the system, extraordinary things began to happen. The quantum cascade generators, despite being built from materials that shouldn't respond to sonic frequencies, began to vibrate in sympathy with the cosmic music. But it wasn't just machinery that responded. Every living being in the system hegemony crew, enslaved aliens, even the humans themselves felt the song in their bones, their blood, their very souls. For most, it was revelatory, showing them glimpses of what the universe could be if guided by compassion rather than conquest. For those who had built their lives on suffering and domination, the song was judgment. Fleet Admiral Tervath watched in horror as his crews began to weep, their weapons falling from nerveless fingers as they experienced the full weight of every atrocity they'd committed. The quantum cascade generators, their operators overwhelmed by a sudden understanding of what they were about to unleash, began to power down despite direct orders to fire. "No," Tervath roared, his forearms working frantically at his command console. "I'll trigger the cascade manually. I'll burn this entire system before I..." He never finished the sentence. The song reached him then, and for the first time in his long life of conquest and cruelty, Fleet Admiral Graxos Tervath saw himself as he truly was. The revelation broke him. The most feared military commander in hegemony space collapsed to his knees, sobbing with the grief of finally understanding the true cost of his choices. Across the system, the same scene played out on every ship. Hardened warriors became penitent children. Weapons of mass destruction were shut down by operators who could no longer bear to use them, and the great machinery of the hegemony's military might ground to a halt under the weight of its own conscience. Only then did the true scope of the human transformation become clear. Dawn's retribution began to change again, but this time it wasn't growing larger, it was dividing. Sections of the ship flowed away from the main body, becoming smaller vessels that moved with purpose toward every disabled hegemony ship. But these weren't boarding craft or destroyers. As they made contact with the alien vessels, their true purpose became apparent. They were healing ships, craft designed to repair not just physical damage, but spiritual wounds as well. Commander Voss appeared on every screen throughout the system, his image now clearly showing the extent of his transformation. He was still recognizably human, but enhanced in ways that suggested evolution guided by wisdom rather than mere survival. "The war is over," he announced, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Not because we have defeated you through force, but because you have chosen to remember what it means to be truly alive. The hegemony as it was is finished. What rises from its ashes will be decided by those who have seen the truth of what they were and chosen to become something better." Through the viewports of the asteroid fortress, Admiral Vexthal watched as her enslaved property was freed not just from their physical chains, but from the despair that had defined their existence. The humans moved among them like shepherds of hope, their touch somehow healing wounds that went deeper than flesh and bone. But it was the change in her own people that shook her most profoundly. Hegemony soldiers who had spent lifetimes enforcing brutality now worked alongside their former prisoners, driven by a desperate need to atone for the suffering they had caused. "What happens now?" she asked, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to her officers or to the cosmos itself. The answer came from an unexpected source, Captain Guntor, his scarred hide now somehow seeming less like badges of conquest and more like reminders of lessons learned too late. "Now we learn to be worthy of the mercy we've been shown," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The humans could have destroyed us. Instead, they chose to save us from ourselves." As if in response to his words, the song of Dawn's retribution changed, becoming something softer, more welcoming. It was the sound of a door opening, an invitation to step through into a larger universe where the strong protected instead of preyed upon the weak. The last stand had become a transformation, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Voraxia Prime, though historians would later argue whether it could be called a battle when one side had achieved victory through compassion rather than conquest, the galaxy struggled to comprehend the new reality humanity had imposed upon it. Commander Hadrian Voss stood in the observation deck of New Harmony Station, built from the transformed remains of what had once been the galaxy's largest slave market. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, he watched as former hegemony vessels worked alongside ships from a dozen other species, all united in the massive project of healing the wounds that centuries of exploitation had torn in the fabric of civilized space. "The integration proceeds ahead of schedule," reported Kira Thorne, her transformed consciousness interfacing directly with the station's quantum networks. The former Admiral Vexthal has proven surprisingly effective at coordinating reparations efforts. Her understanding of hegemony logistics networks has been invaluable. Voss nodded, though his attention was fixed on a particular ship in the construction yards below. The vessel that had once been Fleet Admiral Turvos' flagship was being rebuilt as a hospital ship, its former weapons base transformed into medical facilities capable of treating both physical ailments and the deeper traumas that slavery had inflicted on its victims. Turvos himself worked in those medical bays, his 8 feet of scarred chitin now bent in service to those he had once oppressed. The transformation that had occurred during the Song of Dawn's retribution hadn't made him less formidable, it had simply redirected his formidable will toward healing, rather than destruction. "Any word from Earth?" Voss asked. "The homeworld council reports steady progress," Kira replied. "The restoration projects continue, and the first generation of children born since the awakening are showing remarkable capabilities. Dr. Elizabeth Chen believes we may see full planetary recovery within a decade." The mention of Earth brought a familiar ache to Voss's chest. The homeworld was healing. That was true, but the scars left by the hegemony's conquest ran deep. Entire cities had been reduced to ash, billions of lives lost in a conflict that had lasted mere hours, but whose consequences would echo through centuries. That was why the mission of the Reborn was so crucial. Humanity had been given a second chance not just to survive, but to evolve beyond the cycles of violence and exploitation that had defined galactic civilization for millennia. "They would not waste it, sir," Kira continued. "We're receiving reports from the Outer Rim sectors. 3 more slave operations have been identified, and local populations are requesting intervention, Voss turned from the viewport, his expression thoughtful. The transformation that had elevated humanity beyond its previous limitations came with responsibilities that weighed heavily on every reborn consciousness. They had the power to reshape civilization itself, but power without wisdom was merely another form of tyranny. Dispatch the redemption and the new dawn, he decided. But remember, we offer choice, not conquest. Those who wish to change will be helped. Those who refuse, he paused, considering the weight of his words, will face the consequences of their choices. The door to the observation deck chimed, and a figure entered that would have been impossible to imagine 6 months earlier. Former Admiral Vexthal, her forearms now bearing the simple uniform of a reconstruction coordinator, approached with the measured gait of someone who had learned humility through revelation rather than defeat. "Commander Voss," she said, her voice carrying none of its former arrogance. "The latest census is complete. We've successfully relocated over 40,000 beings to homeworlds. They chose themselves. The Altarian Mining Consortium has agreed to provide full compensation for their former employees." The word slaves hung unspoken in the air between them. Even now, many of the former hegemony leadership struggled with the full weight of what they had participated in. The awakening song had shown them the truth, but accepting that truth remained a daily choice, and the resistance movements, Voss asked. Vexthal's primary eyes dimmed with what might have been shame. 17 cells identified across the former hegemony space. They call themselves the True Order, dedicated to restoring the natural hierarchy of the galaxy. She paused. Their leadership consists primarily of those who were not present during the song. They never experienced the recognition. This was the challenge that kept Voss awake. During his meditation cycles, the transformation had not been universal. Those who had been absent during the Battle of Voraxia Prime commanders on distant assignments, politicians safe in their towers, merchants who had profited from suffering without directly witnessing it, they retained their old perspectives. To them, the hegemony's collapse appeared to be conquest by an alien force rather than evolution guided by conscience. They would learn, Kira said softly, her consciousness touching his through their shared neural network. Change comes slowly to some, but it comes nonetheless. A new voice joined the conversation as Captain Gintor entered the observation deck. His scarred hide now bore markings that identified him as a peacekeeper, one of the former hegemony officers who had dedicated their lives to protecting the innocent rather than exploiting them. "Commander, we've received a priority transmission from the Terran Confederacy. The exploration ship Pathfinder has encountered something unusual in the Kepler sector." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Define unusual." "A civilization that appears to have achieved technological transcendence through methods similar to our own awakening, but approximately 3,000 years ago. They're requesting direct contact with humanity's leadership." The implication sent ripples of possibility through the station's quantum networks. Humanity had assumed they were unique in their transformation, the first species to achieve conscious evolution beyond mere survival. If others had walked this path before them, plot a course for the Kepler sector, Voss commanded. "It's time we learned whether we're pioneers or simply the latest students in a much older school." As preparations began for the journey, Voss returned to the viewport for one last look at New Harmony Station in the construction yards. Former slave ships were being transformed into vessels of exploration and healing. In the medical bays, species that had been enemies for centuries worked side by side to tend the wounded and traumatized. In the education centers, children of 100 different worlds learned together, their young minds untainted by the prejudices that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. It was not perfect. There was still suffering to address, still wounds to heal, still those who chose hatred over hope. But for the first time in recorded galactic history, the strong were protecting the weak not out of duty or law, but because they had remembered what it truly meant to be alive. The transformation was spreading, world by world, system by system. The age of conquest was ending, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic civilization, an age of conscious evolution guided by wisdom and compassion. Humanity had arrived in silence and left no witnesses to report the carnage because there had been no carnage, only revelation. The greatest victory was not the destruction of an enemy, but the transformation of enemies into allies, oppressors into healers. A galaxy built on suffering into something That might yet become paradise. As Dawn's retribution prepared to depart for the Kepler sector, its quantum drive singing with harmonics that made nearby stars seem to dance in sympathy. Commander Hadrian Voss smiled for the first time since Earth's fall. The universe was vast, ancient, and full of wonders they were only beginning to understand. And humanity was no longer alone in learning to become worthy of the cosmos they inhabited. The transformation was complete, but the real journey was just beginning.